What unfolds is a romance that rejects cosmetic transformation in favor of this radical self acceptance. It's a quiet uprising disguised as a fairy tale. Does that answer your question?
Sure. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers, so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our good friend of the podcast, Nicholas O'Donnell, to review a classic film. We're talking about the 2001 American animated fantasy comedy, Shrek. That's right. It is here. I know you all have been waiting for it. There have been multiple requests for this to be reviewed, mostly from the co-host, but also from other people. So,
At least
eventually I
half of
needed to get
them.
out there. This film was written by Ted Elliott, Terry Rossio, Joe Stillman, and Roger S.H. Schulman, and directed by Andrew Adamson and Vicky Jensen. And of course, there were other people who are involved in the production of this. This was a long film in the creation. It was originally, the rights to buy it was based off of it was loosely based off the book Shrek by William Steig, which they got the rights for in 1995 and then released in 2001. This is probably one of the biggest films that DreamWorks is known for. And I will say there is at least a reason for that, and we're going to get into that today. Without further ado, Nicholas, what is your first impressions and rating for Shrek?
It's a 10. If I could give it a higher than a 10, I would give it higher than a 10. This is quality cinema, and they simply don't make them like they used to. What, you wanted more?
uh, this is peak. It's sublime. We can't get any better.
It's so
Yeah.
peak.
Ever since 2001, we've been falling. No, I think,
It's been a steady decline.
yeah, no, it's. I mean, I will say I don't normally go into the fours of comedy. We've had multiple discussions on this. Since we redid the rating system, we have explored the idea of potentially going into other genres with it, trying to make it more adaptable to apply to other films. At the very least, I think that the throughput in this film is enough to give it at least a serious discussion on what is good about this film, what it potentially lacks. And I think that for
Black.
being a potential, like, known as a comedic film, there is a lot of really good things going for this, and my review reflects that. So I gave it a 7.1.
Mm,
Don't even look at me like that.
that doesn't sound right. I think you did it wrong.
You're like, redo that.
I think you did your rating wrong.
I think you messed up. No, I mean, maybe you'll convince me to put
You
it
messed up.
higher. Let's see. All right, so if you guys are curious what Shrek is about in 2026, all right, like, there we go.
Like it ever
Go,
stopped being relevant.
yeah, exactly.
All of
Shrek
our
is
best
life.
memes come from one movie.
A lot of great memes do come from this movie, and there is at least something to be said for that. Not every memeable thing is good though, so hence Ray Skywalker. But let's get into this film today. If you are curious what Shrek is about, Nicholas, you want to give them a summary of Shrek.
It would be my pleasure. Against the backdrop of an image obsessed monarchy, a reclusive landowner finds his quiet life upended when the crown relocates a community of exiles onto his property. And in an effort to reclaim his home, he agrees to retrieve a princess from an isolated tower, only to discover that she too has been living under the weight of expectation. And what unfolds is a romance that rejects cosmetic transformation in favor of this radical self acceptance. It's a quiet uprising disguised as a fairy tale. Does that answer your question?
Sure. You seen that Reddit thread that's like describe a film in like in terms that like no one else would. I, I
In a
almost feel like
world,
we went there.
in a world, we
Yeah.
live in a
This is
society.
just take everything you said and put it in the backdrop of this is about an ogre. Okay.
Tell me what I said that's incorrect. I dare you. No lies detected.
Okay. So, yeah.
I
So
think we
that's
watched a
the film.
different movie.
Yeah. Okay. No. No. Okay. So this is. Yes, this is a classic. Okay, honestly, if you don't know what this is about, like just go watch it. That's ridiculous. Um, um,
It's not that funny.
well,
It's true.
it is nothing he said was technically false. That is a fact. We're gonna if you're curious, what we're just gonna start talking about it. Okay, enough of this. Um, let's talk about the opening of this film. Okay, it starts off with this ogre who's literally just going to the bathroom, reading a storybook, and it looks like that classic old English art style of the monks back in the day type design of this book as he's reading this classic fairy tale story and then tears the page out of the book and throws it away and he's like that's ever gonna happen and forays into the rest of the film. Clearly, I mean, the opener in and of itself is iconic. Like the memes come from the very opening scene, so there's no doubt that this is something that's known by everyone. But what are your thoughts on that opening scene?
So, fun fact, I read that there was initially discussion as to whether or not they were going to play All Star over the intro. And originally that wasn't part of it, but the test audience showed that they really liked that variation of the intro, and so they went for that, the Smash Mouth. I feel like it would have been a way more boring intro if they hadn't opened up with that kind of energy. But it also has become one of the most iconic movie openings of all time. I mean,
Mhm.
anybody in, I don't know, at least America, I feel like this has got to be like a worldwide cultural phenomenon. I don't know how far reaching it is, but I know that anybody that I've crossed paths with, if you played that song and you'd be like, what does this remind you of? With almost 100% accuracy, people would be like, that was Shrek. It's like the Shrek song. For better or worse, if you're All Star, or sorry, if you're Smash Mouth, that song belongs to Shrek. You might have created it, but it's indelibly, like inextricably linked to Shrek. So I would be honored if I was the band, but that's me.
When you said worldwide phenomenon, I couldn't help but look up is does China watch Shrek? As a
Well,
matter of
don't
fact,
leave
they
me
do.
hanging. Oh, there you go.
Although it has faced restrictions, which is crazy. Um, temporary bans to purify the screen. I don't know what that even means, but how dare
It's
they
just,
limit Shrek on the silver
I don't
screen?
know. I don't know, but you asked how what I thought of the intro, and I thought that it set the tone for the entire movie.
It does. That is the key pit. Is that this film? I mean, especially for the backdrop of when it came out, it was coming out when all of these classic Disney films were being released. Snow White, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty. Like this is the backdrop that we have for a film like this, where everyone's getting these classic beautiful Disney-esque films, and then Shrek comes in a lot of ways to just upend the ideas that are presented in those films and more or less play with them. In some ways, poke at them, make a joke of them, and they set that tone off from the start in this one, where it's saying we're going to subvert a lot of the ideas around the classic fairy tale genre. And so the very idea that this guy just is laughing about what a joke this is and then goes on to just shower in mud is just such a good opener. It sets the idea for who this is, for who the main character is, for how this film is not going to be like other fairy tale films that you've watched in the past. It's very good in regards to all of that, and it also sets the tone for what kind of character this is. Right, Shrek's this loner ogre who likes to live in isolation and then occasionally just mess with the people who come nearby who are trying to take him out, and goes, nah, you guys get out of here, and live his life. So they're the pieces are all there from the start, and they do it with the comedic backdrop of the iconic song. Yeah, I mean, you just talked about that. There's no way I won't think of Smash Mouth's Rockstar in any other context just because of this film. So there's something to be said for the accolades that they deserve for making this that iconic. I mean, and there's a reason too that like this is how more or less DreamWorks has become known as a movie production studio, where this was one of the films that put them in the limelight in regards to being something that can create good films. And from there, they created other great films, such as How to Train Your Dragon, which we have reviewed on here. But this was like, in many ways, the start of really being known as a production studio for them.
And
But
this was also at a time where Disney was reigning as king in animation.
yeah,
Most, if not all, of the great animated movies at this time were coming out of Disney. And so this almost felt like some kind of tongue in cheek meta narrative of, I don't know, some kind of commentary on like fairy tales, how they're typically depicted, and then purposefully trying to depart from that in a way that kind of made sense of how almost corporate fairy tale storytelling has become, which back in 2001 at least, I think that's a pretty bold stance. So I
yeah,
think we'll get into that more at some point, but
for sure. And it all starts with the main character, anyways. That's Shrek is not the classic protagonist, not just in the way that he's an ogre, but also in the sense that he is this character that doesn't really want to be there, more or less. He just wants to live his life and chill out. And the whole plot, more or less, gets pushed forward when all of these. Well, first he meets the donkey that he helps save, whose name is Donkey, and then he lets him sleep outside. And the next day, or actually that night, goes out to see all of these fairy tale creatures have just more or less captured his land and been forced to live there instead. And this is like the inciting incident for him where he realizes I cannot live in peace because all of these people are on my land. What is going on? What are your thoughts on the protagonist of this film, how he is introduced and forced to be involved in this plot?
I think he was thrown into it. I mean, they already set the tone between him and Donkey that he likes his solitude. It's one of his defining traits is that he likes to be left alone. He, as it turns out, you find out later, he's kind of had a rough go in society, and he decided to just kind of lean into this rather than wearing his emotions on his sleeve, feeling like an outcast. He kind of just learned to enjoy it by saying, "Well, I didn't really want them anyway. So I'm just going to
Right.
go do my own thing. I'm going to enjoy the peace and quiet." And he's convinced himself that that's something that he enjoys because he's never really had an alternative to our knowledge at this point in the first movie. And so
Mm-hmm.
he's just kind of learned to have a mental shift. And now when that's being challenged by having all of these people around, people who aren't afraid to be around him, he's not used to that. He's not sure how to deal with that. He turns out they're a bunch of other fairy tale creatures, so they're not normal people in this universe. That kind of explains why they're not so afraid of him. They see him as their opportunity to reclaim their own lives as well. And so he begrudgingly leaves his house, not for their betterment, but for his own. Because up until this
Mm-hmm.
point, he's been kind of a self centered kind of character. And for better or worse, I mean, it does give him a lot of area to grow in the film, which by the end, he kind of realizes that maybe there is something out there in the world other than himself that's worth fighting for, worth living for.
Yeah. And that's the big thing for his character, which is well developed, especially for a kid's film. As much as this film is upending a lot of the ideas that had been presented in very classic fairy tale storytelling previously, it's not like there's anything in this film that's necessarily super complex in regards to how they're telling the story, right? But at the same time, they do drag that development along from a good starting point and add that nuance to it where you go, okay, he's just a loner that doesn't want to be around other people. Why is that? And then you get this idea as he discusses with later with Donkey that he just wants to be away from everyone. Everyone always just looks at him and says that he's this ugly ogre and no one wants to interact with him. His line is they judge me before they even know me. And so that's where you get this nuance in this film, which makes it more than just, oh, this is a funny film with lots of funny things that are being said and it's great to laugh at. It's also got this pretty solid arc that's going on here where it's about someone who wants to be a recluse from society and not want to engage with the people around them because they are afraid of that interaction and afraid of working with other people and who because they don't want to face that rejection. And that's in some ways something we can all relate to, right? That idea that we don't want to be rejection is not a something that anyone wants to deal with in their psyche. And so the idea that he just opts for the easier option, the safer option, and just not interact with people is a understandable, I guess, baseline to come from. And it's also, like you said, it's also great that he starts off from like selfish motives because he has that little speech at the beginning where he goes, "Attention, all fairy tale things. Do not get comfortable." And then he goes, "I'm going to get you all off of here." And everyone else is excited because they don't want to be here anyways. But he's not doing it for them. He's doing it because he's like, screw you guys, get off my land, and I'm going to make this happen.
Yeah, this is a movie that's packed with a lot of slapstick and crude jokes, but its most powerful scenes are pretty quiet and vulnerable. And you have to establish him as a character that is self motivated for those later scenes to actually mean anything. Because if he came into the story as the kind of character that he leaves the story as, there'd be no growth, and it would pretty much just all be humor. So
Right.
I think that they set a pretty good roadmap to follow, and they executed it quite well.
Yeah. Well, especially in regards to some of those other characters, which is where you get very interesting dynamics here, because you know
A
from
lot
the
of good
start,
character play.
exactly. You have Shrek. He's this loner. He doesn't want to interact with people. He wants to be by himself. And then you have Donkey comes in and he basically just wants a friend and he cannot shut up. And that personality comes in contact with Shrek's personality and they inherently just clash against each other from the start of the film. And it's one of the great dynamics of this film, but before I get too much into it, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the introduction of Donkey and even his character as a whole in this film.
For me, at least, I think Donkey starts off kind of annoying because
Oh, for sure.
I
And I
think
think
it
that's
also
the point.
depends on like, do you identify more with Shrek or more with Donkey? And it probably is not a good thing to either be like, oh yeah, I'm 100% one or the other, right? Because I think there's a healthy mix. But they purposefully, I can only assume, are purposeful, like complete opposites of each other. Like
Mhm.
there's a dichotomy, and it's just that's why they clash. They could not have been written to be more like yin and yang characters. Like
Right.
they work together, as it turns out. Give them some time, and they can get a lot done between the two of them because they have different specialties. But they aren't likely friends on the surface level, and so I'm not saying who I tend to identify with more, but I don't think Donkey starts off as the most endearing character. I think pretty quickly you come to realize that he comes from his own insecurity, he comes from his own trauma, he comes from his own background that starts to reveal to you maybe why he is the way that he is. And the more you learn about any of these main characters, the more empathy you develop for them, and the more you start to root for them. And then the more you're happy to see when they are able to work together and the more it upsets you when you find out that they have their own schisms and rifts that form between them. And then ultimately, you have that kind of satisfaction when they're able to reconcile and pull things together for the climax of the movie. So it
Yeah.
has a very kind of fluid and logical, and which feels weird saying logical in a movie like this that almost feels like a parody that got its own legs and then stuck the landing. It's just it's unlike anything that had come out up until this point in time that I'm aware of. But
Yeah. Well, it's also just from the baseline that this relationship between the two main characters is a huge part of the film, right? And so when you're creating a story, I think a lot of the question is how can you create interesting conflict in the story, especially in low stakes environments, right? And the thing that's so great about this film compared to a lot of other films is that the stakes, especially at the beginning, are just so low, but they're still strong enough to push the story forward, right? You have, Donkey. Well, Donkey probably has the biggest stakes, I would say, of all of them because he's about to get captured, and he at that point he doesn't know what they're going to do with him. Shrek, he's like, I just don't want to be bothered. And then you have Lord Farquaad, where he says, more or less, he wants to be king, and he's not king because of a technicality, and so he wants to be married to a princess so that he can be king. And it's like these are the baseline that pushes everything else forward, which on its face is just so ridiculous that these are the things that are pushing people to go on this grand adventure to save a princess from a fire-breathing dragon. But it's just so good in regards to these characters are because of the way they are, it's enough that you get the whole story being pushed forward from that. And so that's where you get, especially if you have those low stakes at the beginning, they can be funny, but also how can they push the story forward? And that's where you get the dynamics between, say, Donkey and Shrek, where Donkey, his personality just inherently clashes with Shrek's personality, and that clash adds that interesting dynamic that keeps us engaged.
Well, and to add to your point about stakes, you've got dozens or hundreds of fairy tale creatures that have literally been driven out of their homes.
Yeah,
So, like, they're putting all their chips on Shrek to get back to what they used to have, or else they literally are going to have to go move out and find some home in the woods with strangers. He's not going to let them stay. So ultimately, at that, I guess they truly are just homeless. So I would say the stakes are
yeah,
pretty high for the secondary characters as well.
yeah, yeah. They definitely want Shrek to succeed. And it's also interesting too because even within the creation of, for example, that conflict where he first goes to Duloc and he fights in the arena, and or this whole situation with Lord Farquaad where he's trying to find someone worthy to save the princess for him and bring her back to him so that he can marry her. The In that dynamic, you see the situation where more or less Shrek is given this opportunity to go and save the princess for him or get shot by 100 arrows. And he goes, well, I guess I'll go on this mission. And Donkey then questions him, like, you're an ogre. Why don't you just do this? And more or less it comes down to Shrek thinks it's less of a bother to go on this mission than it is to actually like force everyone else out of their home, which is just like such a funny and interesting dynamic to be pushing the plot forward. Once again, like these low stakes environments, Shrek's just looking for, in his mind, the easiest way out possible. And the easiest way out is to go save a princess.
And it
What are
keeps
your thoughts
working.
on that?
It's a good observation. It is funny for something that's not explicitly written out in the story. I think that when you pay attention to it like that, that's a definite like narrative line that they continue to draw. It's just always the least inconvenient, or at least, I mean, I guess you could suppose that it is an inconvenience to go out and run these errands for people because it's like those games where it's like, oh, you want this? Well, to get this, you have to go do this first for me. And then you go to get that, and you're like, oh, well, I can give you that, but then you have to go do this. And he just keeps being given all these new lists of things to do, and it's all just so that he can get back to having his peace and quiet and his house back to himself to reclaim his
Yeah,
property. And because his stakes are so low, and because he almost just shrugs it off as like, ugh, another inconvenience,
yeah,
the humor is able to land because it's not like, I guess you could compare it to Marvel, where you got people in like life or death situations that are just dropping one liners, and you're like, is this really the time for that? But in this movie, the
mhm,
stakes for him are so low that it feels like it very often lands. So
yeah. Well, and I think another reason why it lands is because going back to that dynamic between Shrek and Donkey is that there is two very different ways that these situations are being interpreted. And you get Donkey, where his interpretation is way up here. He's like, everything is a problem. And then you have Shrek, where all of his ideas of everything being a problem are way down at the bottom, where he's like, that's not a big deal. Going from whether they're walking through the woods and Donkey's like, oh no, there might be robbers in the woods, as Princess Fiona says. And then Shrek's like, I'm the scariest thing out here. What are you guys concerned about? Or when they're going across the wooden bridge to get to the castle over the lava chasm, and Donkey's losing his mind. He's like, I cannot do this. And Shrek's just like, dude, this is too easy. Let's just get over this one little baby step at a time, right? And that dynamic helps us to keep in mind, okay, this could be a serious situation. It's not like this is nothing, but it also still puts us in the persona of Shrek more or less being this I'm just doing this because I have to. This isn't actually a problem personality, right? I don't know if you had
I
anything to
think we
add
have
to
to
that.
ask ourselves if Shrek is better as a romance than as a comedy, though, because this is a movie with layers to it.
Yes. Well, I mean, and that is part of the question is there is multiple different throughputs, I guess, if you will, where someone could look at it and go, well, this is a fantasy film, right? Because it's all about this fantastical fairy tale creature world. Or someone else could look at it and go, well, this is really just a romance between an ogre and a princess, and then just take that as the main throughput of the film. And someone else might look at it and go, well, this is really just a story about a character change, right? Kind of a comedic version of an Ebenezer Scrooge type change where somebody goes from being I just want to be alone and a crotchety old ogre to being I actually care about the people around me and I realize I am appreciated in this world, right? So, I mean, is it one in particular? Is there one you think stands out in that?
Just talking through this, I think I just realized that's one reason that this movie has withstood the test of time so well and has been so widely beloved, is because it has something for just about everybody. If you happen to have a fantasy or comedy or romance or whatever as your favorite genre, you probably can find something like that in this movie. I think it spans a really large gamut and it does a lot of things really well to the point that regardless of what you're coming in having an affinity for, it's probably going to have something that leaves you feeling satisfied.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And even beyond that, it has a rating that kids can watch this film, right? Sure, it has the humor that adults will get, but also it's not something that's so grotesque or something that's so mature in its content that kids can't watch it. So it's also just accessible to most audience out there, which makes it another way that it can span the gamut that maybe other films cannot.
True. I think you have the breadth of tastes and you have the depth of what ages can watch it. And when you're able to do really well in both, you're expanding the pie and you're giving your potential audience as much room to find something that they like in it as possible. And I think in both regards, they they were cooking.
Yeah. Especially in regards to that romance aspect, which is not a aspect of it until what halfway through the film, maybe, where they
Probably
finally
about
save
that.
Princess Fiona, and she's at first living the fairy tale dream. She's sitting there waiting to be kissed, and instead he just shakes her awake and says, "Let's go." And they get out of there, and she realizes she wasn't saved by Prince Charming. She was saved by an ogre, and she freaks out and goes, "I don't want to go with you. I'll be waiting for Lord Farquaad right here." And then Mr. Delivery Boy picks her up and starts walking. So you get the dynamic where that relationship does not start off on a positive note. Instead, it goes, I'm here to get my swamp back, and you are the ticket. So come with me. And if you don't want to, I'm making you come. What are your thoughts on Princess Fiona as she's introduced in this film and as she becomes this love interest in the middle of Shrek's life?
I mean, there's a lot you could say about that. I think that they, much like Shrek and Donkey, have their own kind of polar opposites, maybe going in a different direction. She has her own desires that she's been waiting a while for, and Shrek is just looking at her as a means to an end. Like, you're my ticket to getting my property back. Whereas she has like dreamt of this moment. This moment's now come. It's nothing like what she expected. Her expectations have been shattered, and she realizes that she's just another player in this grand game that's happening, and she's reconciling her own problems that the movie delves into later on, while at the same time trying to find out where she fits into the footprint for the movie at this point too, because again, she's only come into this movie maybe halfway through. You've already got motive and plot line and potential outcomes established, and then she comes in. And so now she adds this whole additional layer of depth to, as a main character, one of the main characters. I would argue that you can interpret this movie as having Shrek, Donkey, and Fiona as like the three main characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now you have a triangle of main characters who each have their own hopes and ambitions and dreams, all of which are kind of like going in opposite directions, but because of a common threat, they're being pushed together to reconcile, try to figure it out, and in the end, hopefully find their own little slice of life. But she has to go through a lot to get there. I think you
Yeah.
could also argue that she might be one of the most emotionally deep characters in the movie.
Yeah. Well, and they do so many dynamics of that specific scenario very well, especially because as you learn, and also spoiler alert, but not really because have you not seen anything on this?
It's 2001.
Yeah.
I have no empathy
Fiona,
left.
yeah, Fiona's curse, and her curse is that at midnight she turns into an ogre if she hasn't kissed her true love. And so when they have that as a dynamic from the start, it's it, it creates some interesting interactions from the very beginning, where when she realizes that Shrek is an ogre, that's the antithesis of what she's looking for, where she goes, the person who saved me is the very creature that I turn into that's a monster in her mind from when it's midnight, and I don't want that. That's the exact opposite of what I want. And so when she goes, "Oh no, this is all wrong. You're not supposed to be an ogre." He's like, I mean, he goes, "I don't care. Like, I don't care what you think. I'm here to freaking bring you back to Lord Farquaad. That's my solution." And she's sitting there still caught up in her fantasy universe going, "This is taking everything that I have dreamt of and turning it upside down." So, yeah, I think that her start, especially with that background in mind, when you see that, makes a lot of sense. But then you go forward into the film and you see that she starts to see the nuance between Shrek and Donkey as she overhears their conversation at night. And then, of course, the interaction between her and Donkey when Donkey realizes that she is an ogre and transforms into an ogre at night. What are your thoughts on those character developments, especially in those interactions? We've touched a little bit on Shrek's earlier, but like you said, there's a triangle of interactions going there and some miscommunication too.
I think that this movie is trying to say something about
Really?
beauty and identity. And well, I mean, it says a lot for sure. But I mean, like on a serious note, I think that there are
Mhm.
serious through threads in this movie under that layer of comedy that do take itself really seriously. And despite Donkey and Shrek and Fiona all having these different ambitions, these different places in life, in their unification for this story, there's they share a lot of similarities. They share the similarities of not feeling wanted, not feeling good enough, not feeling up to beauty standards, right? Shrek's already gone through this realization. He's gone through the stages of grief. And when you find him isolated in the swamp, he's at that stage of acceptance. He's come to terms with it, that he's not up to what society wants anything to do with. And rather than be upset with himself for it, he leans into it. Fiona's at this
Mhm.
point where she had something to lose once. She hadn't always lived like this. And so she feels like she has something to hide from society so that she can continue to live in the way that, or eventually live in a way that she's never gotten to, but has always dreamt of getting to as a princess. Donkey feels like an outcast. He's probably going through the stages of grief. He's kind of realizing that like people will straight up kill him or sell him off or just treat him terribly. But he still kind of has this hope that he can find his place in the world where people won't treat him that way. And he kind of found that in Shrek, despite Shrek not realizing that right away. And he definitely finds it in Fiona because she treats him great. And so, despite having such stark differences in how their characters are written, and despite outwardly seeming like they are such polar opposites, they have enough in common that at the end of the day, they're able to form a pretty strong bond between each other.
Yeah. And I think that's where you get the thematic. interactions so well developed so well together, if you will, right? Where Shrek is an outcast of society and his interaction is to make himself more of a recluse. Donkey is an outcast from society, and his reaction to that is to try to cling to other people that he interacts with. And then Fiona hides herself away in her own way, where she tries to break this curse and tries to achieve true love so that she can no longer be have this double life, if you will, where she is being an ogre at night. And so that's where, yeah, they're totally different characters. You have Fiona being totally different from Shrek, who's totally different from Donkey, but the way that, and that creates good tension, good conflict between them. But at the end of the day, they're all dealing with the same problem in different types of, in a different way, right? And so that's one way, both it's cohesive in regards to the themes and the messages that they're trying to tell us, but also keeps all of the characters interacting together in a way that makes sense for us as the audiences. And that's also a way that they keep it simple, right? It's not it doesn't have to be too complex. It's something that even little kids can grasp, the idea that, oh, everyone just wants someone to care about them, right? And that's where all of these characters are at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's a lot of sincerity underneath the sarcasm in this movie. And I think that maybe to a much lesser extreme, since this is, fictitious, between these three characters, most viewers are going to be able to see a little bit of themselves in one of these characters to a degree. And anytime that somebody can tell a story and the viewer can see a little bit of themselves in one of the protagonists, you're going to have a lock on these viewers. And if you stick the landing, then people are going to love the experience.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. The main impetus behind all of these people being on this story to begin with is the character of Lord Farquaad, and I think he deserves his own discussion in this film. No matter how much you want to run as fast as you can away from that, he needs his own discussion. What are your thoughts on Lord Farquaad, the one who sends Shrek on this great and noble quest?
I don't even know if this is a hot take. I could be in like the 1% minority. I could be in the 99% majority here. He's just a guy that you love to hate. Like he's so unironically, I don't know. It's like sometimes you're like, this guy's so funny. He's like, he's the best. Sometimes you're like, wait a second, this guy's a total tool. Like everybody in this movie who's miserable, it can all be traced back to him. He's very full of himself. He's very, I mean, you think Shrek is self-motivated. This guy has his own motives, and I mean, they're not even noble motives. At least with Shrek, he just wants to be able to lead a quiet life because of the way that society's treated him. Farquaad just wants the fame and the glory and the highest things in life, and he'll step on anybody that it takes to get it. And so I guess in a way you could say that he shares certain qualities with Shrek, but in the same way is is almost like the evil version. And the fact that they share any commonalities at all makes for a much richer storytelling because think about the most common hero and villain tropes. Like for everything that the hero is, the villain is not, and vice versa. But anytime you can have some crossover, maybe some kind of understanding, some ways that they could potentially reconcile their own personal motives, even if they don't end up coming to an agreement, they could find something they could agree on that makes for much more interesting storytelling. And to the degree that Farquaad and Shrek could both have their own motives that they're willing to do some less than desirable things to achieve, even though Farquaad will go to way harsher extremes to the extent of killing people, imprisoning people, forcing people to marry him, all of that. Shrek wouldn't do any of that, but they both do still have their own selfish motives. And I have to say, I think Farquaad steals every scene that he's in. I don't know. I think he has some of the funniest lines, some of the funniest scenes. And if you're the kind of person who's watching this movie for the comedic aspect, you will be hard pressed not to love him as a character. Not because he's a good person, but because you will get some of the biggest laughs out of him.
Yeah. Well, and especially, I mean, from the start, I think that you get the dynamic where he's a cruel master, right? But he's so comedically presented, both like literally in how tall he is, that you can't help but laugh at this guy as he does these things. And the classic example is where he finally gets the magic mirror, right? This is the magic mirror that the evil witch from Princess, I believe it's supposed to be from Sleeping Beauty, that the queen, the evil queen, looks at and asks, "Who's the fairest of them all?" And then Lord Farquaad looks at that and is trying to find the truth of, is his kingdom the fairest kingdom of them all? And then the mirror says, "Well, technically, you're not a king." And instead of just, looking for the true solution, he looks at Thelonious, his torture man, and says, Thelonious. And Thelonious smashes a mirror, more or less like, "Hey, I want my answer to be given, not necessarily the true answer." And it's just so funny. Like, the way that they do it is just presenting not someone who's just someone who's so self-centered that he's looking for what he wants to be given in any situation. So yeah, Farquaad is great. I think he's not necessarily the most nuanced villain, right? But he's so he's so worth it there. Also, one of the, like, this is such a side tangent, but I was thinking about it in regards to Fiona, right? And how Fiona is technically one of these fairy tale creatures. She is a cursed princess who is, who turns into an ogre at night. And so she would, underneath the paradigm he's living in, be one of those fairy tale creatures that gets forced off the land that Lord Farquaad owns. And so,
Good
hypothetically,
observation.
is that who he's looking for when he says to Gingy, when he's torturing Gingy, the gingerbread man, "Tell me, where are the others?" And Gingy's just stalling and talking about the Muffin Man, right? Like, maybe, we don't know, but could be.
I think you
Just an
have to ask
observation.
yourself, for those who have seen this movie, they have their own opinions. If Shrek doesn't feel special to you today, like, is that proof of its influence? Like, has it become like a victim of setting the standard? Because like every one of these characters we talked about, like, I can't help but wonder if this movie has like normalized the snarky, self-aware, animated formula to the point where everything else that's come after that has felt ordinary. When in reality, like a lot of what we were talking about, like they pioneered it in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, whether you're talking about Farquaad or Shrek or any of the others, gosh, there's just something to be found in like each of them that's so good. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know.
Yeah. Well, and that is definitely a good point, that the self-aware aspect of it, especially in the comedic sense, has definitely been a bigger part of what you see in modern cinema today, that I do not believe was part of cinema previously to the same degree, right? You get that even in a lot of the classic, or quote unquote classic, Marvel movies that have come out, right? Whether that's Guardians of the Galaxy or Ant-Man and those kinds of things, there is some degree of that same type of humor is being presented with the idea of comedic relief, but also some level of self-awareness, which is going on there. But yeah, I mean, you don't get that at all in original Disney fairy tale films, which is why this was in a lot of ways upending the ideas presented there and making fun of them, because that was the goal, right? To poke that fun. And there is someone who said that Shrek has become a standard to some degree today.
Mhm. I agree.
Nice.
I think it changed animation. I I don't know how much of it.
It changed my life.
I have Shrek to thank. There's that meme, Shrek is love, Shrek is life.
Yep.
Maybe it's getting close to being a little overbearing, but I mean, I feel like you'd be hard pressed to not say there's something to like in it. Now, if you're a fanatic like us, if you're kind of lukewarm on it, if you didn't like it, I want to hear why. Like, do you have comments? Like, leave it in the comments. Because I mean, I want to talk to those people. There's millions of
Yeah.
us who love it.
It's a national treasure. It was one of the first animated films to be put in the National Film Registry for the Library of Congress.
That's right.
There is a reason for that, so it's no joke there.
It's very deserving.
An honorable,
And now that
honorable choice.
Blockbuster's closed, the next time I go to the Library of Congress, I'm gonna have to go rent out my VHS there. It's gonna be great.
Somebody once told me. Yeah. The okay, so looking at the end of the film, right, you see that Shrek is having this emotional situation where he realizes he's in love with the princess, and then he's about to go tell her, and then he overhears her talking to Donkey about no one could love a horrible, ugly beast, right? And she's talking about herself, but Shrek thinks that she's talking about him.
Hmm.
And he gets all mad and decides, all right, fine, screw this. I'm just going to let her go off to Lord Farquaad and let them live their life happily ever after. I'm reverting back to my old self and going back to my swamp, right? And then from there, he has the interactions with Donkey and realizes that maybe that wasn't the truth, right? And goes off to stop the marriage that is happening between Lord Farquaad and Princess Fiona. What are your thoughts on how this movie comes to a climax at the end of the film?
I like that the climax of this movie isn't defeating a villain. I mean, like on its surface, you could say that it is because ultimately they do manage to overthrow Farquaad. But I think you could make a deeper argument that the villain of this movie is about accepting yourself because they all have things about themselves. And it sounds like a cliche, but I mean, like literally, if you ask yourself, each of the main characters have things about themselves that they're not happy with. And throughout the course of this movie, they find a way to reconcile that and find a way to be self accepting. And I think that makes this movie more emotionally mature than most fairy tales, uh, if not any other one. And I think it's why this movie's humor doesn't distract from its emotional depth. I think it takes itself seriously when it counts, and then it interjects the humor when it doesn't, or to add a little bit of levity when it's needed because the very real points that they talk about are so deep. And it's done in a way that just about any audience, from younger kids to grown adults, can wrap their minds around and come up with a takeaway from it. And for a movie that takes itself so unseriously at a lot of the time, they're not bad takeaways. I mean, there's a lot of very real things you could incorporate into your worldview. Uh, Maybe don't like put the stamp of approval saying, "Well, Shrek taught me," and or because Shrek said so. I think they're just generally good things that maybe Shrek happened to help lead you to. But but yeah, I think that its its highs and its lows are directly correlated to the kind of lessons that they wanted to make sure that for all the laughs they managed to weave into it and to do it in a way that makes sense. And there's some solid takeaways in this movie.
Yeah. And I think that that's why the ending of the film where he tells Fiona that he loves her and Fiona says the same back to him is where the movie comes to a completion is because you get the that is like the highest form of, I guess, opening yourself up to other people and showing that you care for them and are not so self-focused and isolated like Shrek has been previously, right? That is the full completion of his growth in this film. And the full completion for Fiona as well, as she comes to realize that she's not defined by this ogre person that she has turned into at night, but she's defined by the people that she cares about and who care about her, and that she can accept herself for who she is rather than pretending that she's something that she's not, right? And so it makes a lot of sense, and I think that it's really good. It's also poetic the way that Farquaad is killed by the very monster that he sent Shrek to slay, but beyond that, that's not the focus of the film. It's more just the focus of the film is who these people are and how they develop and how they grow and what they learn through that and about themselves, about each other, and about appreciating someone rather than isolating yourself or living into your insecurities, right, and leaning into those, but trying to grow through those and become a better person through the process, which is kind of great. It is so funny just to like stop for a second and be like, "Am I having a serious conversation about Shrek
We're
right now?"
talking about Shrek. I think it doesn't get the credit it deserves, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it is. There is a good reason that it's well beloved, but also funny, and it hits all those marks for a reason because there's a lot of really great things about it. So It's
But that's
not
why
just a comedy.
that's why podcasts like this are great, is because there are a lot of things that people can say, "Oh yeah, I really liked that." But then when you peel back the layers and you ask a secondary question, you're like, why did you like that? A lot of people, they might not be able to tell you. Like this, it's important to stop and think about these kinds of things, even if it's a children's movie. If there's something worth taking away in it, it's a good endeavor to stop and ask yourself, why do I like this thing? I think it's just a generally good life lesson to try to incorporate into whatever it is you're talking about, whether it's movies, whether it's literature, whether it's a way that you believe. Ask yourself, well, okay, I do believe this, but why do I believe this? Maybe you'll find you're a little more open-minded. At the very least, if you maintain your same position, at least you can articulate it the next time somebody asks you.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So, what are your thoughts on the lasting impact of this film? Clearly, they are coming out with a fifth Shrek, right? So this is
I'm
no
sure we'll be
joke of
there.
a film,
I'm sure we'll be there in seats
right?
opening night. So
D-box seats, just waiting for the
everybody,
rumbles.
everybody, come back to Lost Plot when that happens, and I'm sure we'll have something for you. I guarantee it. That is a Nick O'Donnell promise that Maverick is going to have Shrek 5 on a Lost Plot, and I'm going to
Oh
be the one to
boy.
do it.
Oh no. All right, well, I guess we'll see you on 2027 in that one. Yeah, I mean, it made
Unless it's postponed again, in which case I'm not promising a date. That's for sure.
true. True. DreamWorks had to push it back. I mean, it's
We don't need another Shrek 3 on our hands, so I say take
yes.
your time and make it quality.
Just looking at how this film like ran, how it all developed. What are your any final thoughts on this film? Things that you think are worth people taking away as they walk back to their room and turn Shrek on for the fifth time today?
Or at that point, if I've already seen it for that many times, I might just go turn on Shrek musical or something just to change things up a little bit. But I mean, in summary, like I would say that that layers joke, the line of having layers like an onion, I think you could say that this is like a metaphor for the movie as a whole, because it's kind of the thesis if you think about it. Like there's surface level comedy, there's meta commentary, there's emotional vulnerability, there's industry satire, and I think that this joke that on its surface seems like just kind of like, well, ogres like onions, haha. Like that's actually the key to understanding the whole movie. And I think that that's kind of a cool way to truncate the amount of depth that this movie is able to offer into like an allegory.
Yeah, yeah. It has a lot to be offered, even for it being a kids' film. It made bucket loads of money as a result, right? Everyone, even if you don't think this film is good, which if you're doing that, why? But if you don't think this film is good, the budget that it had versus what it made speaks for itself. It cost them 60 million to make, and they brought in almost 500 million, right? So close to 10 times the amount that they cost to make is what they ended up earning from it. It's knocked it out of the park, right? It was ridiculously successful and it put DreamWorks on the map in a way it wasn't previously. So
But they
there's
didn't
a
know
lot
that
to be
this was
said
going to
about
be a big
this.
hit. Like this first
Exactly.
one was such a deviation, as we've talked about, how this was like setting such a new standard in this Disney era that I don't know how well they could have expected this to do. I think this one was a genuine gamble, and then people loved it, and then you got Shrek 2, which I thought was excellent. We'll get to that at some point. Hopefully, if we're going to be getting to Shrek 3, that wouldn't make any sense to skip Shrek 2. But but at that point, that's when they started to find a groove and then lose the groove and then kind of get the groove back. And then hopefully with Shrek 5, find its groove again. But I think that it's really hard to beat the first one. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And usually it is. I mean, let's be honest here. It's either the first one's the best or the last one's the best in almost every situation, in my opinion. But we'll see if that's the case this time. I'm putting my chips probably on the first one still being the best. That doesn't mean the fifth one will not provide some really great value for us.
Just
So
as long as they don't go with that original art style that they started to
yeah,
showcase.
please.
I
Oh
think
my
that's why they
goodness.
postponed it, so that they could try to go back to its original roots. Hopefully, it gets the Sonic treatment.
We need classic Shrek back. Yeah, that's right. We don't want a reanimated Shrek. That's a new character. It's a new person. We don't want a new person. We
We
want
didn't
our
wait this long.
fun-loving ogre. We didn't come this far only to come this far.
I didn't wait this long just to get slop. I mean, like, you've got a
True.
legacy. Like, honor the legacy.
Honor the Shrek legacy. Hey, well, I mean, that's what we're trying to do here today. And I think that's a good point to end it on. So that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back as we always are next week. We'll see you all then.